So, good morning. This is my first time I've done any sort of presentation like this, so I hope you'll bear with me. As Mark said, my name's Alice Ellingham, and my business is peer review. I started working and publishing with Macmillan Press in 1994 as a science graduate, and after leaving them, I started Editorial Office in 2002, managing peer review with OUP, and we've grown over the last 14 years to the size we are today, which is, we have about 2,000 hours of peer review work every week over approximately 85 different journals. So just to give you an idea who some of our customers are, we work with a wide range of both major international publishers, societies, some very small societies that only have a few journals and have no in-house editorial experience. And they come to us for our experience as well as for managing the peer review of their journals. So when I was asked to present this talk with the researcher to reader, I was presuming there would be a slightly different mix of people. So it's quite publisher heavy, so I apologize if I'm teaching my grandmother to suck eggs with any of the information I'm going to give, and I will try and move quickly over the first slides, which is setting out who are the main players in peer review. So I'm sure most of you could list them, but I thought we'd just have a little look at what they look like from where I sit, because we've done a lot of publisher talk so far yesterday, very interesting talk about engaging and communication. And I think it was Graham who said there was a little black box that said where the magic happens. And I think sometimes we're the little black box, because I think we are sometimes the unseen part of the whole process where the magic actually happens. So, the first player in peer review is the publisher or the society. Sometimes they work independently, sometimes societies work with publishers, and we have to communicate with both of them. So a society may own the journal, publisher may publish it. As mentioned yesterday, the publisher has 96 things to do. Not only to publish, whether that is print or online, they market, distribute, and more often host. They add value, and that has always been the view of what the publishers add from the start of publishing. And one of the main elements of the publisher today, I feel, is to foster editorial independence. It's one of the major things on the COPE guidelines, is the publisher is not the editor, and they should be fostering editorial independence within their journal. And this is one of the 96 things that I don't agree with, sorry Rick, on your list, is that accept, reject is part of the publisher's role. Even with an in-house editor, there should be a split between the publisher decisions and the editorial independence of the journal. The publisher also has a drive to improve publication standards, and that they work often with COPE and other institutes that work towards that. So moving on from the publisher, we have the editor or the associate editors. Now these are very important people to our office. They are the ones who are the key people of the journal. They are usually professors, either clinicians or researchers. They are very, very busy. They do not have the time to do a lot of the work that is needed to keep a journal moving fast. They're not reimbursed for their time usually. There are some journals that do, but the majority of journals that we work on, the editors are not reimbursed. They do this because they want to do it. They demand instant support, often immediate support, but they have very high ideals and plans for their journal. They want their journal to succeed. They want it to be the best, and usually they think it's the best, whether it is or not. They also provide, this is obviously general, but they do provide very high editorial input. They more often than not want their journal to be the best. They are not interested in skipping peer review. They are interested in increasing the quality of their journal. We then next have the authors. Now, I think these are probably the least understood element of the peer review cycle, especially from the editorial office. The majority of people who work in the office are administrators, they're not scientists. They don't really understand the drive to publish. They don't understand the demands on the time or the requirement to publish from the authors. However, we're the first contact they get. They submit their paper to a journal of their choice, and we're the first contact we get to decide whether their paper is suitable to move forward into the peer review process for a number of different criteria. They're a mixture of people. We get some very early career authors, and this is their first submission, all the way up to authors that submit papers, have been submitting papers for many years, and some would actually like to go back to putting them in the post. They're time dependent. They want their paper reviewed fast, and they don't understand delays. And English is not always their first language, and this is becoming more of a common experience when we're trying to explain to authors what the submission guidelines are and what's required of them to get their paper through peer review quickly. The language barrier can be difficult when you're looking at nuances of ethics statements and the difference between the words approved or according to. When you're explaining that to someone who is using English as a third or fourth language, that's quite difficult to get across to them. And then, of course, there's the other major player in peer review, which is the reviewers. Now, I wasn't quite sure whether we'd have any reviewers in the room today, so I thought maybe we'd do a different picture for them as well, because it really depends where you're sitting, whether you feel you're fast or not. And the fact that so many of the reviewers are actually the authors, you think that maybe more should be like this, but generally they're not. They are hard to secure. As we found out yesterday, there's been a lot of research going on, and I have to say that my speech today is nothing to do with, I don't have data about what the research is. This is of experience of working within the editorial office. So they are overloaded with requests. One of the most common responses we get is, I'm really sorry, I've got 2 or 3 papers on my desk to review already, I just cannot do another one. They do often require chasing, and I know there was an interesting study done recently where they discovered that the way to get reviewers to submit quicker was to reduce their deadline. Because if you give reviewers a 3-week deadline, they'll take 3 weeks. Because if it's not overdue, they don't necessarily bring it to the front of their to-do list. If they know it's due in tomorrow, and there's a brief, polite email reminding them of that, the chances are they'll get it done. They assign their work according to when they can fit it in and when it's needed. So not necessarily giving a longer peer review amount of time doesn't necessarily help. Again, there's no financial reimbursement for their time. They are expected to review as part of their academic career, although I know that some publishers are now starting to offer rewards, and Wiley are running trialing a new credit system. They are, however, absolutely necessary for current peer review. There's lots of discussion about different types of peer review, but this is the peer review we are working with at the moment, and we can't do it without reviewers. They are very time-consuming for the editorial office. We spend a lot of time securing them and then chasing them in. So if we have a quick look at the whole cycle, this is from the STM report. And there's a lot of the areas that we were talking about yesterday, but we're just concentrating on this small, nice, tidy-looking area here. So you have the communication between the editor and the authors, the editor and the reviewers, and the editorial office is sitting on the edge of this, just gently watching the world go past. Not quite. This is a slightly more accurate demonstration of the type of communication that goes on within the editorial office. So we have the publisher or the society who we're talking to, and they're also talking to the editor. They're developing the journal. We have the editor and probably a board of associate editors or deputy editors who are also managing papers. And then from there, you have the communication from the authors and the reviewers to the editors and back to the editorial office as well. And then you add, and this is one paper, but even that is a little bit simplified as to what actually happens. Because actually, you have co-authors. You have the lead author that doesn't check his email, and you have the co-authors that are trying to work out how to move their paper forward, but they don't have access to the paper on the dashboard of their peer review system because it's in the lead author's name. You have the reviewers. You have the reviewers that agree, and you're ready to chase in. You have the reviewers who don't respond, and you're trying to work out, should we be chasing them more? You have the reviewer who agrees and then disappears. Where they go? I've no idea. You have the reviewer who says, yes, I will get this paper in. I'll get it in tomorrow. And then it doesn't turn up. So you email them, and he says, oh, yes, I'll get it in tomorrow. and it never arrives. And I think from the editorial office, that is just say no, we'll move on. But all these elements take up time. So I'm going to present a little bit of data from some of our journals, but before I do this, I just want to have a little bit of a reality check of the number of journals that I'm talking about. So according to the STM report, there are about 28,000 peer-reviewed English language journals in the STM industry. Now, I took the number of journals we have and tried to create a pie chart to demonstrate what section of this number of journals I was talking about, but it made absolutely no difference. All it did was put a line through the middle of the pie chart, because even though we work 2,000 hours a week, we are only touching 0.25% of the journals that are out there. It's a tiny amount, and it's staggering when you think of multiplying the amount of time we spend up to the amount of journals that there are. So the following data is based on 3 of our journals. We collate a large amount of data all the way through the life of the peer review. And so I've picked 3 different sized journals that we have. So we have, I can't see the thing, one of the journals which is about 19,000 annual submissions, a slightly smaller one at 1,500 and 800. So there are 3 different range sized journals. And it also shows you the average number of hours we spend per week managing the peer review. Per submission, that comes down to between 45 and 50 minutes a paper. And that's over the life of that peer-reviewed paper, from the moment it's submitted to the moment the final decision is made. And as you can see, there's a breakdown with, I'm not quite sure if you can read the words, possibly not. The orange quarter section is the time spent on new submissions. So that's the time checking the manuscript before it gets into peer review. The other large blue areas are emails and working the queues, actually progressing the paper through. So these 3 journals, different sizes, they all take about the same amount of time. Does this mean that every journal is the same and that you can fit this certain amount of time into each journal? No, I've seen someone shaking their head already. No. So these are the breakouts of the amount of time, it's percentage of time spent on the different areas within those 3 journals. I'm just going to explain a little bit about each of the journals. So Journal A is a society journal. It's a high media profile clinical journal, and it has an in-house development team, editorial team, who drive the journal forward with the editor. It has very in-depth clinical reviews, and we spend quite a lot of time ensuring that these reviews are substantial enough for the type of journal. We have repeat authors. The authors know what they need to submit. We don't spend a lot of time changing anything at the new submission stage. Anything that is not essential for review is pushed forward and decided at revision or at acceptance. There's a very fast turnaround of papers and a high reject rate. So by postponing the checks on new submissions until later in the stage, we've reduced the amount of time spent on this journal because we only check the showstoppers. Anything that can get amended later in the stage gets pushed back. Journal B is publisher-owned. It's had a new editorial board and a new editor-in-chief in the last 2 years who came in with a very ambitious plan to change this journal around and to make it a higher quality journal than it was. They'd made a substantial amount of changes to the instructions to authors, and consequently, we are still spending a large time on new submissions because the authors that previously submitted the journal don't quite get it that we've changed the submissions and are still trying to submit papers with the guidelines of the old journal. Now, one of the major changes of guidelines on this journal is the number of figures that are allowed. Now, if you review a paper with 12 figures, you can't then ask the author to take 6 of them out so that you can publish it with 6 figures. So this is where a lot of the time goes on this journal, is persuading authors that if they take 6 figures and put them in and just number them 1A, 1B, 1C, etc., it still counts as 6 figures. You'd be surprised how many figures they try to say is in one figure. They've made a development of special issues, and that's where the other time is there, the grey area. And this has been very successful and has been very well received by the readers. And authors have a very high take-up of the invitations to submit papers for the special issues. They have a clear review process, and we don't find ourselves spending a large amount of time chasing the reviewers for this journal. The reviewers are very good. So Journal C is a publisher-owned, society-associated journal. It's very well established with a very high-quality reputation. It has a fast turnaround, and one of the ways it does this is it has a two-tier editor triage system at the start of the process. So we don't actually see the paper until two sets of editors have looked at it. So there is very little editorial time spent on a large percentage of the papers, which is why it is possibly one of the fastest journals we work on. However, it does have a large amount of production time. We manage a two-level copy editing and technical editing system where it gets sent out to one of several specific editors and then chased back in and sent out to the other editor. And so the proportion of time on the production for this journal is far higher than any other journal that we have. So, as an editorial office, what do we feel that we spend our time doing? So, the first stage at submission varies from journal to journal, but ideally, we are looking to move the paper forward as fast as possible without sending it back to the author for changes and changes. Because if the paper doesn't get accepted or even sent back for minor revision, there's a lot of wasted time in communication. We have one journal that we have just started working on that's come to us from a society where they would send back for everything. And the last paper I picked up was coming in and was sent back because the title wasn't central on the front page. We've scrapped that check. So we're looking for scope. There's no point putting a paper through to the editor if it doesn't comply with the scope of the journal. We're looking for the submission policy, especially with issues such as figures, which will have an effect on the paper after it's reviewed. We spend quite a lot of time checking ethics, and we have a large amount of experience on checking animal and human ethics to ensure that the correct guidelines have been stated and that the ethics statement that is included in the manuscript is acceptable. And then we have a lot of author declarations, we have copyright, competing interest, we have funding requests. And all of these have to be adhered to for the journal in order for it to go through to review. For review, we have the invitation, secure, and chasing in cycle. And for some journals, especially some of the niche ones, this can be very hard. It can be very hard to find reviewers, and as I said before, we spend quite a large amount of time on this. The decision is merely assisting the editor. Again, the editors are very busy, and often we have to work with them to find out when they can best apply their time to their list. Some people like a list, some people like emails to be sent to them as it happens. We have one editor who only likes to work past 11 o'clock at night. He doesn't want any emails before 11 o'clock at night because he's too busy. He spends 11 till midnight every night doing his emails. So we have to work out how to get those emails to him so they're not binging him during the day because he doesn't like to receive an email on his phone about the journal that he can't deal with. He wants to receive it and deal with it. So we have to work out how to delay our emails in order to allow the editor to work at his best pace. Production, we don't do any copy editing or technical editing ourselves, but especially with some of the heavier production journals, we do facilitate the movement between copy editing and technical editing before it's exported to the publisher. And then we get to the catch-all, the assist. This can be anything. This is emails mainly into the inbox asking for help, and this is one of the areas where time can really be taken up. So I've just got a few examples of the sort of emails, and these are all actual emails that we have received. So I'll read them out to you because I'm not quite sure you'll be able to read them. So the first one is exclusion of data. Data from one subject was excluded due to head motion and from two subjects because they fell asleep in the scanner. Lack of animal ethics. We did not need ethical approval as the mole rats consented to participate in the study. Financial disclosure. Does my mother's pocket money count as financial assistance? Late reviewer excuses. The in-house editors are strong and waterproof, not something you can claim of computers. I'm still dreading to think whether he was doing a review in the bath. Reviewers. I have uploaded the wrong review. It's for an entirely different paper. Help. That one's really rather common. File omissions. Dr. X refers to an attached file, but I can't find it. Can you help? And that's often a mixture of they haven't attached the file or they just can't find it. And it's there, and it's just helping. And then getting papers ready to export. I will promptly rewrite the text and references according to the Harvard format. Meanwhile, what are line numbers? So the amount of emails and the variety of emails that come in, we have no control of. It's a retail situation where you have to deal with what comes through the door. So at the end of the day, why can this black box, this magical black box, not be free? And the simple answer is time is money. It takes time. The publisher pays for the system, the editor gives their time free, but it takes time, especially if you want accurate, quality, and prompt peer review. But it can be cheaper. From experience, and as I'm saying, this is just from our experience from the small number of journals we have, there are a lot of editorial offices that do not have the experience of how to use best practice. The publishers often have no breakdown of where the time goes. They will be told that their editorial assistant needs this amount of money, especially if they're not in-house. If they're with the editor says, my editorial assistant needs 35 hours. And emails cost money. As I said, the biggest thing is emails cost money. You need to run the system to inform the authors. If you can prevent an email coming into the inbox, you've saved time. So by using the system correctly, you can save time. The publishers' innovations are great, and I love listening to everything the publishers are thinking of doing, but they don't filter down necessarily. There's a lot of steps between the guys at the top and the guys at the coalface working the peer review system. And there's no real industry standard. There's books and there's suggestions, but peer review differs vastly. So I'm just going to give a little bit of an example of a lack of oversight. So we have a journal that we help out with holiday cover, and we've done this for the past 4 years. And they've grown 4% over the past 4 years. They've gone from about 900 submissions up to 1,000 submissions. And the original editorial assistant spent a full-time job managing these papers. The editor moved from one country to another, and the new editor wanted an editorial assistant in his office. So the outgoing editorial assistant trained the incoming editorial assistant, and this is very common. So the editorial assistant, who's made this her job over 10 years, took everything that she has developed herself and passed it on. But because there's a 4% growth, it was agreed that she would stay on and help out. So she's also doing 10 hours. So it's gone from a 35% hour-a-week journal to a 45-hour-a-week journal. There's basic elements that are missing here. They have no filtering of emails. They use additional spreadsheets. And from my experience, I can look at any peer review system and I can sniff an Excel data spreadsheet being used alongside at 20 paces. It is inefficient. As soon as you take data off the system and put it into an Excel data spreadsheet, it's out of date. Working the queues, working the system to its fullest is the most efficient way of managing a peer review. And just because I'd like to make a point, that's the number of hours we would need to manage the journal. So how do you reduce time? You know where it goes. We track all our time. We have a bespoke piece of software that we use that automatically logs what our staff are doing, what journal they're working on, and what task they're doing. It stops and starts automatically. They spend no time fiddling with timesheets, pen and paper. And once you know where your time is going, that's the only way you can find out where you can reduce the time. We're also looking at developing a free author tool. This is called Ethics Gen, and it helps the author to write their ethics statement, because we spend so much time asking authors to rewrite their ethics statement, and we're just about to release a Chinese version so that the authors can answer the questions in Chinese, or the questions are asked in Chinese, and it encourages the authors to then write their ethics statement in English, because they do have a level of English they have written their papers, but it's asking the questions in their own language so they understand what they need, what we're looking for from them. So just to finish off, the unseen costs of peer review is communication. It's emails, it's working with all the elements of the peer review, and it's keeping those tight is where you can reduce the costs. So you need to know the tasks, you need to know your time, and you need to use best practice. Thank you.